So, like Jesse just stated, you know a little bit about me now. I'm also a board member of the Maine School Garden Network, which is a group of individuals who realize the importance of teaching children early on all about gardening and using that as part of their curriculum in the school system. As well as a board member of MOFGA, which is the campus we're on right now, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and also Fedco Seeds. That is a new appointment, and I'm very excited to be part of that. And before I go into any of my presentations about native plants, I also like to give thanks and acknowledgement. While I do have indigenous ancestry, it is not in this place. My parents are from the island of Puerto Rico, and my mother's family is all indigenous. As a matter of fact, I was just having a conversation earlier today about being on Ancestry.com and how after a certain time, about 100 years in, there's a drop. There's no information because it was all oral history. And a lot of it was lost when colonialism happened on the island of Puerto Rico. And I will not pronounce the names of the nations and the tribes that are here in Maine, and there are others that are not federally recognized, because I want to be respectful of how how their language is used. And a lot of this is actually anglicized. But there is a wonderful link to the Wabanaki Alliance, and it's a pronunciation guide to each of the tribes and nations that are federally recognized here in Maine. But understanding that for millennia, there have been people here using and making use of and understanding and using medicinally and for food and for diet, for clothing, all of the native plants that we now get in our gardens because they're just pretty. They're all useful, and some of that knowledge, even just a speck of that knowledge, is so incredibly important for us all to have and respect. So the land use steward is actually cited on what is now called Penobscot Nation, and it's in Oregon. There is, if I walk through the 5 acres, there is a constant connection to everything that is around me. Whether that is from my own indigenous ancestry, whether that is because there were people there long, long ago using these plants, bringing these plants to this area. There's such a palpable connection to me. And I thoroughly appreciate and thank and enjoy and have great gratitude for that. So we're going to talk about plant communities, because that is actually what builds some of the resilience of native plants. So plant communities, very simply, are all around us. Whether you walk down the street in Portland, whether you walk through the woods in Lee Hill or somewhere in the county, just look around you, and you'll notice that many of the same plants grow in the same places together. So, for instance, when I have people ask me, can you recommend some plants for my garden area? My first question to them is always, what is growing there now? Can you tell me about the trees? Can you tell me about any of the other plants that you have in the place? That gives me such an enormous amount of information as to the sun and soil conditions of the area without even having to step onto that person's property. The same thing happens when I'm just walking about and when you are all walking about. Take a look around you. Notice the plant communities, and by that I mean when you see a beautiful sentinel of a white pine, those old growth white pines that you might see in the Wisconsin, Maine. Take a look. You'll notice that there are balsams right alongside. You'll notice that there are maples right alongside. There might be some popples. There might be some smaller saplings that include beech, some other trees, some shrubs, some ground covers that all reside within the same plant communities no matter where you go. Why is that important? So it's a symbiotic relationship, and nature encourages that. Whether it's trees and shrubs, whether it's the herbaceous plants and subshrubs and grasses and rushes and sedges, and I have some examples of those even if you just want to touch. I'm a very tactile person, so I hope you'll come over and look and feel the plants. And in addition to that, insects, fungi, bacteria, and other living organisms are also part of that community and part of what makes our ecosystems thrive. And when all of those communities and all of those things that are within those communities are doing well and happy, so are we. Nature is very efficient. Without our intervention, we think we're helping nature, where in fact nature very often is helping us. It is structured efficiently, it knows what needs to go where and how it needs to grow and when it needs to grow. One of the other things that I happen to always hear from customers is, I planted this plant here, and it hasn't come back yet. My response is always, look around. It may have gone to where it found its best conditions. It may have found its ideal grown area without your intervention. You brought the plant along, but the plant decided to go walk about. And native plants do that all the time. So don't ever give up. If you ever buy a native plant and you think to yourself, oh my word, it's gone, it'll never come back. First of all, they're very resilient, and they are very hardy, and they will come back. They may just not come back where you wanted it to come back to. And that's okay. And that's also part of our own let go. And the plants themselves are actually teaching us, let go. You're not in control. And if you think you are, let us help you feel a little less in control and have a better understanding of exactly what needs to happen for the benefit of the ecosystem. And this is just a typical overstory, substory, understory of woodland. But it also mimics what happens in our growing areas. How many of you are gardeners who have ornamentals and you look for, I need something with height here. I need something a little lower there. Oh, I need ground cover here because it's too bare. You're actually subconsciously mimicking the woodland and everything that exists around us. You're trying to add those layers and those phases. And that's a really good thing. And it's really helpful if you're also incorporating native plants into the mixture. Because those native plants will then add abundance and resilience to all of those other plantings. And this is just an example. This is actually my driveway. And in this example, you can see the ferns. You can see, there are willows and beech and hazelnut. And then you see taller balsams. And then you can't even see the tops of the sentinel pine trees, the white pines. And in that mix, you have maples and you have cedars. And then you have other herbaceous plants and other subshrubs and other things that you may not even be aware of, mosses and lichens. Things that are enjoying this ecosystem, that are being part of this ecosystem, that are thriving and helping me thrive. Because the more I see of this, the more I learn, the more I want to know, the more photography I do, the more I use to be able to then grow and educate and encourage other people to grow native plants. So, and it's actually because they say it does not thrive within monoculture. And so I do apologize for that. Just want to see how alert you are right now. But this is a monoculture. It's stunning. The colors are glorious. They hit you right on, and it's beautiful. This happened to be taken somewhere in Borneo. And it's an ornamental. It happens to be an invasive. It's yellow loosestrife. But it's very popular in the ornamental trade business. And I looked at this, and I studied it for a while. And I stand around a lot, and I watch, and I observe, and I take in. And I stood in front of this for a long time. I didn't see anything happening. There were no bees. There were no butterflies. There were no moths. It was nothing. So for stunning as this looks visually, it's not adding anything to the ecosystem. So if the bees don't come to one of these plants, they will not come to 100 bees. This is actually This is sedge glade, or sedge meadow. I call it more glade because of the trees that are there. But every single thing in this glade is added to the ecosystem. There are sedges of all kinds. There are grasses of all kinds. There are ferns. There's moss. There's lichen. There are standing snags of trees, which are invaluable to the ecosystem. But when we walk through somewhere and we see a dead tree, we think, oh my gosh, that's got to come down. Without thinking that some of our native pollinators actually overwinter in those snags. Woodpeckers make those holes, and then chickadees, which also overwinter in Maine, use those snags as nesting. What's dead in the ground is good for fungi and feeding the soil. It's good for feeding bears, which we have quite a few of, and we see they're scratching because they're looking for things in the dead wood. Everything within this ecosystem is working and thriving. And there isn't a moment that I can step and not find something hopping or flying around in this space. So how does this translate to native plants in our own garden settings? So, and again, this is based on observation. There was no scientific data that happened to concur with this. It happened to be 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, July and August of 2022. And it was the absolute hottest, driest summer we've had in Maine. It was awful. Farmers, on a listserv of farmers, and farmers were, rightly so, very upset that so many of their crops were not growing and were dying and nothing was happening. Gardeners were decrying the fact that nothing was happening and their lawns were yellow and the flowers were not blooming properly or everything was dying off. It was the second season of my commercial plant business, and we're on a well. Well, I had to make a decision. Keep water for ourselves. Keep water for the plants that I was going to sell at the farmers markets. Or water my front garden, which is where I actually cultivate many of the seeds that I sell. And I decided that the front garden had to be the one that did without, that was my sacrificial garden, unfortunately, that season, that it had to do without water. And we had such a dry summer. As a matter of fact, I took a video of this particular plot, and you could hear the crunching underfoot. I was worried about the Jerusalem artichoke, or the sunshokes, which happens to be right up there. It's the tallest of the plants. I was worried because sunchokes have a very, very shallow root system. Maybe 6 inches, if that. It's a perennial vegetable. It produces these tubers that are very good, very edible. But I was worried because I knew that without the water, without the additional moisture of rainfall, they might die. I kept an eye on these for quite a while from a distance. And it took me about 4 years to grow milkweed, and then all of a sudden milkweed has appeared everywhere. Milkweed decided to appear next to the Jerusalem artichoke or the sunchoke. Interesting. Because the area where the milkweed is now is not actually intended for milkweed. And then I started to see eating primrose was growing alongside the Jerusalem or the sunchokes. Very interesting. While other things were actually dying back because of lack of water, the sunchoke was thriving. The milkweed was thriving. The evening primrose was thriving. So that plant community there was thriving. When everything else might have been drying away, sizzling in the sun, this was thriving. This led me to question why this plant community came together, how these plants came to be with each other, what was the purpose of it, and what were the different root systems of each of these plants. And it's fascinating to know, so there's the evening primrose, sunchoke, the common milkweed. This wasn't happenstance. Native plants, and some of this has actually been quantified with scientific data, native plants come to the aid of other plants and other native plants. So alders, for instance, that you will find in sort of marshy areas, alders have a particular bacteria at the root systems that benefit everything else around them. It benefits the root systems of other plants, and it strengthens other plants. Willows will do the same thing. Willows happen to have the same compounds as aspirin, which actually is a root, it's one of the things that helps roots grow well. When willows appear in the ecosystem, they're actually there to help other plants. The great birch, the Tulipa unifolia, happens to be called a nurse tree. The great birch actually grows at a quicker speed than some of the other trees around it, the oaks and the maples. The great birch will actually shade the saplings of other trees until they grab hold, until they're strong enough and are able to grow and do well. It's fascinating, it's wonderful, it's incredible, and it's real, and it happens. And this is what was happening in my front garden. So here we have common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. This particular plant is quite something to behold in the garden. It is beneficial to over 450 different insects. Never mind birds and other things that benefit from milkweed. Once it is established, it spreads slowly but aggressively. However, it takes about 3 to 4 years for those seeds to actually germinate and become plants. And it took me about 4 years to actually learn something about that, for the plants, for the milkweed to actually come about from seed. And it happens to be the larval host of monarch butterfly. And basically what that is the monarch butterfly will lay its eggs, and monarch butterflies only lay about 500 eggs per lifetime, and never 2 or more in the same place. That way they ensure the progeny. The toxicity in the plant actually keeps other things from preying on the caterpillars of monarch butterflies, and also preying on monarchs. So if you think about it, monarch butterflies are actually the same color as a detour sign or a danger sign. They're yellow, they're orange and black. It's basically the international signal for anything that's going to prey upon that. Don't take me, I am going to toss it, you're not going to play me. So here we are with a milkweed. And if you notice there, that is a monarch butterfly egg on the milkweed. And it has a very, very fascinating root system, which leads me back to the resilience of that plant unit. So it has feeder roots or rootlets, and it has a taproot that can go down into the soil 6 or more feet. And it's also rhizomes or rhizomatous. It has lateral roots that actually I always call them mozzarella sticks. They look like mozzarella sticks running just below the soil surface, and each of those has a node. From each of those nodes will grow a new plant. But because of that incredible root system, we're able to get this plant that is able to capture soil from deep beneath the earth's surface, or the soil surface, and bring that back to feed and help other plants. It also spreads by seed, which is what you see in the fall, seed pod that we just saw. And then in the fall, the floss actually is taken up by the wind and it's propagated by wind. But this is part of the root system of the milkweed. This is a potted milkweed. And I don't know if you can see, that would be the taproot that will eventually develop and it goes into the earth. And all of these others artichoke, and in my front nursery garden, this will grow to about 12 feet tall. Typically it grows to about 9 feet. And that's one of the tubers. And to show you, eventually we will develop that tuber. I'll show you that in a little bit, because that's not the best example. So I apologize. But the tuber is where the plant, each of those nodes will produce a plant. And I will show you what that looks like from another specimen. It's in the sunflower family. It grows up to 12 feet tall, produces edible tubers, and it's a perennial vegetable, so it's actually a really good thing to incorporate into your perennial permaculture gardens. It does have a shallow root system, and it prefers its fullest sun but constant moisture. And bumblebees enjoy the late season blooms on this particular plant. And then a little bit about evening primrose, because this is the trio that came to mind for resilience. This is one of those plants that when people see it, and I've had it at the farmer's market, they'll say, oh, I pulled that out as a plant and threw it away. It is. It looks exactly like a weed. It's a biennial. It actually has a rosette. At the first year, it's a basal rosette. It looks like nothing really important, nothing really interesting. And it has these red flecks. That's usually how you can tell it's evening primrose. And it's a Nothera biennis because there are other primroses. And then it flowers in the second year. And again, often torn out in gardens as a weed. It's one of my absolute favorite plants, and it will grow up to 6 or 7 feet tall. So you see the flower. The flower grows along the bottom of the stalk, and it grows upward, and then the seeds are produced. The flowers are actually in this area here, and then the seeds are produced at the upper stalk. And then they just look like little bananas in the way. The seeds are going to disperse, and they actually disperse not only by wind, but they also disperse by the American goldfinch. It's one of the species of birds that will stand sideways on the stalk of a primrose, peel back the seed pod, dip its beak in there, and pull out the seeds. And it's one of their major food sources before migration. And I actually have some, because one of the things we're going to be doing, I didn't want to talk all day. It's a beautiful day, it's warm in here. I wanted to actually have you do a little evening primrose hands-on. Highly beneficial plants. According to Mount Sinai.org, there is quite a lot of information as to the efficacy, medicinal efficacy of evening primrose, especially evening primrose oil. It's also a trap plant. So if you have ornamentals that you would prefer the Japanese beetle not attack, I suggest having some evening primrose around periphery. They prefer evening primrose to anything else. It also has a deep taproot. It's about 6 feet in depth. And it's the auto-migration food source for the American goldfinch. So how do we build resilience in our growing areas? A diversity of plants. Understanding that a diversity of plants is absolutely paramount and necessary to the resilience that we can ourselves put into our ecosystems. Understanding that everything whether it's to mate, like these crane flies are doing on the crane still doing, to sleep overnight, and then to gather nectar and pollen, or to gather pollen as this sweat bee is doing here. So having that understanding, finding places and people who are willing to share information with you about what is happening in the ecosystem, what might be well served for you to use in your own spaces. And letting go. Let go of the thought that we have control over anything in our gardens, in our yards, and in our woodlands. Sometimes just letting go. I have a saying that I use in my garden classes, and that is, the less I do, the more I see. The less I do, the wilder my garden becomes. The wilder some of the areas are, the more I see. The bigger the dragonflies, the bigger the birds, the different bird songs, the frogs, the spring mayflies, all of that gathers in places where I have let go of the control of thinking that I know better. And learning everything we can. I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly exploring the values of information, especially around native plants, and observing. It's one thing to grow something and have it be pretty and enjoy the flowers and the pretty foliage, but observe, how does it play within your ecosystem? How do the insects interact with that plant? How do the birds interact with that plant? Stand somewhere far away and watch these plants, the birds rather, interact with the plants. I have a mating pair of phoebes that come year after year and nest in the same place. And the phoebes interact with all of the native plants. The male phoebe goes out, the female phoebe comes back in. And they're constantly using the plants either as shelter or as food. And incorporate more native plants into your systems and in growing areas. And the reason I say incorporate more native plants is many of us are things that perhaps are no longer thought of as good to have in gardens. Do not tear everything out. Unless it's a highly invasive plant, don't tear everything out. Everything has a purpose. I find leopard frogs under the hostas by the front door. The leopard frogs are cool, there's moisture down there, they're happy. I'd rather have leopard frogs in my growing area than have to worry about that hosta that's sitting there. And let things go wild every once in a while. I did that for 2 years in a row, only because I also collect seed. And I have to say, it has been one of the most rewarding things you can imagine. I've heard different birds of prey. I have seen more songbirds than I ever have. And the pollinator life that is in my garden is amazing. You can stand there and it's deafening. The sound of pollinators happy and working and eating and feeding and mating and having, laying their eggs and doing whatever it is that pollinators do. So that's the end of my PowerPoint presentation because I really rather have you do some hands-on. And if you want to contact me, please feel free to do so. I'm always available for questions. I love questions. And I also am usually at Orono and Maine farmers markets as well. If you have any questions now, I would love to answer them. And I apologize for my word. I am quite Mormon here. Yes.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to add something.
Of course.
Okay, so evening primrose is edible by people. And you probably know this, but I didn't hear you mention it in the talk. But anyway, so it's a biennial plant, so the main edible part is the root. And the best time to harvest it is between the first and second growing season because that's when the maximum amount of food energy is going to be here. And unfortunately, you can't grab the rosette of an evening primrose and yank on it to get a root out that way. So I tend to leave them until the second year's leaves are just showing, so the root is wintered over. and you yank it up and you get a big root like taproot, like a carrot, and it'll be white with a pinkish coloration near the top. And so far, my favorite way to use the evening primrose roots is to make pancakes with them, like potato pancakes. And you can substitute an equivalent amount of the evening primrose root for whatever potato that you're using in the recipe. Use the same recipe, it should come out great. And evening primrose flowers are edible by people too, just wait too.
Thank you, Russ. I love that. And for those of you, I just met Russ this morning, and I absolutely had the most wonderful conversation with him because he's also a native plant grower, but his expertise is in edible plants, which I find absolutely fascinating. So I would love to learn more from Russ myself. But thank you, Russ. That was wonderful. And I know that there's so much efficacy to evening primrose that some of it is perhaps unknown to us. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Any other questions or observations or comments or even something you don't know that I don't know? I'd love to learn from others. Yes?
Can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
Okay, just make sure I don't use it, but, so you said, so like, nobody has like one long taproot, right?
Mhm.
6 inches or so.
6 feet.
6 feet?
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
So they can like reach deep down to get like water nutrients, right?
Exactly.
And then, so, did you say that the feeder roots then like disperse that around too? Is that what you were saying?
So have you ever grown tomatoes? Or okay, so you know how tomatoes are really heavy feeders.
Yeah.
Common milkweed is the tomato of the native plant world. It's a very heavy feeder.
Okay.
And if you think about it, it's a food source and a shelter source for 450 different insects. So that constant draw on the nutrition inside the plant, the plant has got to figure out a way to recapture that and maintain it. So those feeder roots are going to the soil surface where there is nutritional value, and perhaps some minerals and things that you can't get deeper below. So those feeder roots are not only helping to stabilize the plants because they can get quite heavy as well, they're also helping to gather more nutrients that maybe, it's almost like getting a snack from the convenience store versus going for the full-on meal. The taproot is getting the full-on meal, whereas the feeder roots are getting the snacks to keep it going. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
How can one transplant a milkweed? I've got a lot of them, and they are in a lovely bed of bishop's weed that I'm trying to get rid of, so I want to try and save the milkweed while I get rid of the rest.
With a lot of patience. That's how you.
Which roots?
So remember I talked about the mozzarella stick. That is your perhaps quicker way of propagating, and what's going to happen is you're going to transplant the milkweed, and it might be okay for a couple of hours, and then it will go completely droopy and lifeless. And it may or it may never, and it's been my experience that it never comes back. It'll try. You'll see that plant trying to come back, but it won't. Unless it's a very, very young plant, a very young specimen. When you have a taller, older specimen, they do not bounce back. However, that mozzarella stick, the rhizome, is going to have nodes, these little kind of triangular caps on the top. That's where you get more plants. So if you have enough of that rhizome and you have the right depth, because if you think about it, they're not going to be that deep underground, so you've got to make sure that it's just the right depth. And not in a round pot. A tray would be better if you have something that's deep enough, because that rhizome will continue to then put out the feeder roots and establish itself with the moisture and the nutrients that are in the soil. And in order for it to put up another plant, it needs to have that activity below the soil first. So not in a round pot. Make sure it's deep enough. So I would say, maybe 3-4 inches below the soil surface for the rhizome, because you also want to make sure that those nodes don't expend too much energy trying to push up too much soil. Make sure that it has the right amount of moisture, but not too much moisture. Because although common milkweed, you have swamp milkweed that actually prefers it more moisture, common milkweed does not. Common milkweed actually likes with harsh, rocky, disturbed soils. It's been my experience. It likes a little moisture, but not a lot. And then that, it gives that plant that time to also start thinking about putting that taproot down. So it has to be a very young plant, no more than 4 inches tall. It has to be at the right time of year. That's really important as well. Long enough rhizome, deep enough soil surface. And well drained as well. Yes?
So, I have some acreage, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they've come in once, they're gonna come in again. And their initial comments from the plant specialist is, all invasive weeds do, right? And there's mat straw and stuff like that. Now, one of the things that you're going to be coming to talk to me about is actually establishing wildflower meadow areas. And I've already done quite a bit of, individually grown plants, planting meadow areas with individual plants. But this will be with tarping system and seeding. And I'm thinking a little bit about that because there's quite a bit of good milkweed in there too, and I just think the last thing I want to do is, and there are probably other good native plants in there too. And I changed the idea of annihilating everything in order to grow a entirely mixed meadow from scratch. Because, first of all, mixed meadow is not really how nature does it, right? It's much more in colonies and clusters and cooperative groupings, as you pointed out. So I just wonder if you have some suggestions for me in terms of thinking about working with what the MRCIs will be saying. And knowing, so I suspect we're probably talking 6 to 7 acres of wildflower meadows, essentially from scratch in areas that are mostly really difficult weeds, formerly grasslands on farmland that's been, farmed hard for well over a century, nearly 2 centuries. So, do you have any suggestions for saving the good stuff and working around the good stuff while following the NRCS protocols, which are otherwise, probably pretty good at
So there are 3 things that come to mind for me, 3 avenues.
Yes.
So the first one is, what is your contract for? Because it is a federal contract with a federal entity, and if they've already stated to you that this is what you should do, and pay for it, you have to abide by that, otherwise you don't get paid for it. The second thing is growing a garden is such a personal thing. And unless you are going for commerce, going for fodder because you're feeding livestock, it is very difficult to say this goes, this stays, unless it's a highly invasive plant. As a matter of fact, I got some bittersweet this morning right out there, because that's just how I go out there. And the third looks like when you do, let's say you do archaeology, right? You take a small section of that, and horticulture, you take a small section, and you look at that small section to then figure out what might be happening in and around that space. So if you do that for yourself, that would really give you a very good idea, a very good window into the native plant activity that is probably already there. And if you're not aware, seeds of most types, but especially native plants, are dormant anywhere from 10 to 100 years. So there may be dormant seeds in there of plants that have not been seen here in Maine for 50 years, but because it was always farmed, they were turned over, and you've never seen a plant. And it may very well be that you get to see something that we haven't seen here in the farm. So if you have the ability to take a test area, maybe it's a 10 by 10 area, which will give you a really good idea, because you've got 7 or 8 acres to work on. That's quite a bit of space. And acres, what, 260 feet by, or 220 feet by 220 feet or something like that. So that's 10 by 10, it's just a, microcosm of what might happen. And then go along with whatever the NRCS says, because you're already in a contractual agreement. But let them know, read the labels. If they give you the opportunity to buy your own seed or look at what it is that you're going to be throwing down as a mix, make sure that you know that they are all indeed native plants. What happens very often with these native plant seed mixes is that they might run out of something, so they put something else in that is not native at all. So you would have gone through all of the work and effort and expenditure to put something in that wasn't part of the equation to begin with, or wasn't part of what you had thought about. And then think about how it is that you're going to be using the land too. So when you talked about, and just for the general audience, when you spoke, your name was Ben. When Ben spoke about targeting everything, it's because in order to establish a meadow, we need to kill off everything that's there. And in order to do that, we need to target over a long period of time. And it's called solarization. So basically the sun is killing every root, every seed, everything that is under that tarp. And it depends on how deep the root system is and whatever it is that's growing there. You're going to have to keep it anywhere from 6 months to a year to 3 years, depending on what it is you're doing. So if you have the opportunity then, try to test the soil, see what's growing there. Ensure that whatever NRCS is approving as well as whatever seed is indeed native grass, native flower seed to this area. And not like a Midwest combo, because then you get plants that are not necessarily native to Maine. And then think about how you're going to use the space. Are you just establishing acres and acres of wildflowers, or is there an opportunity to also include some shrubs and some sapling trees that have been indigenous to the space? And just look at the periphery, what is growing out there, because that's a very good indicator of what may be growing in that field before you can feed it. Does that help? Any other questions? Yes.
This is a question you would also put in the room if we run out of time. If anyone has suggestions, I'd love this. I'm finding myself to be a one-trick pony, and I've come to the end of my tricks, and so I need to know the next step. So we have got an acre of land, and we're pretty sure that they cleared the topsoil off and sold it, and so we're trying to heal it. And so I've been doing little experiment plots with my one trick, which is compost extract and that magic carpet mix that sells. And they've been very, very successful. But now I've got these great little plots of clover and daikon radish, and it's very successful. But I want to do the next step toward turning it into food forest, permaculture kind of stuff, not just a big old meadow of clover. And so my question is, because we all agree don't dig, right? So do I turn start to put things in, and then will they actually help? So, that's the question.
Yes, so actually what we have is great cover crop and weed manure. So if you turn it in, what happens is many, the daikon radish in particular, is one that is used to break up soil. So you have heavy clay or very dense rocky soil. Daikon radish will break through anything, which in turn helps break up that soil, and helps you turn it over easily. It also helps to aerate the soil because there's a little more airflow through there now. But if you turn over all of the clover and the daikon, you're actually feeding soil, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
So turn it over, feed it. You don't necessarily want to have daikon radish growing in and around your pretty plants that you want to have growing there. You may want daikon radish, especially if you make kimchi. It's great in kimchi, and it's great, in salad radish as well. But you don't necessarily want to keep it in there. So turn it over. And when they say don't turn over your soil too much, you're talking about rototilling. When you're using a broad fork, or even just a shovel or a rake of some sort, turning over little bits at a time, that's not going to, you're not destroying the structure of the soil. It's when you're using mechanical means and a big rototiller, and you're turning over a foot, and now you're bringing, so not only have you taken up some of the small, the little bit of soil, you're also bringing up some of that subsoil and maybe some clay and some rocks that were long buried that you don't necessarily want in your garden space. But turning it over with a broad fork or a garden fork or even a garden spade is not going to destroy the structure.
As long as you're not like grating and grinding and all of that.
If you've ever seen anyone rototill, there's a blade that goes by and there are these discs, and you see it on the farm with the disc carrows. It's basically going right in and it's chewing up the soil. That's what's detrimental because you're destroying the soil surface and the soil structure. And what you're also doing is some of that beneficial bacteria that's deep within and is going to be helping the plants grow better is now up on the surface because it's been turned over.
Thank you.
But you're welcome.
Will the radish winter over?
The daikon, I think, does, if I'm not mistaken. Radishes are very hard. If you've ever forgotten a radish in your garden, you'll have radish seeds for like years. So they're very hard.
Also, I would suggest you check out Christine Jones if you want to do more cover cropping. She talks about diverse species cover cropping and the relationship between diverse cover crop plant species and the health of the soil microbiome.
Thank you. Christina Rose.
Yes.
So channeling my permaculture teacher's role, I would suggest some sheet mulching. So you don't have to do the whole thing, but see what comes up. You know what I mean by sheet mulching?
Yes.
So I take it, I have a hard time finding even newspaper these days, but you could use cardboard. But sheet mulch it, get it wet, put it down. You might want to put some azomite first on it.
What's
Or
azomite?
azomite, Fedco sells it, all the minerals from A to Z. And then compost underneath the sheet mulch. You don't have to do a whole lot of tilling or road or whatever. But if you get your sheet mulch down and wet and solid, like keep it together, don't make a lot of gaps. And then come back over, you could plant right into it with some other plants and then go over it with straw. And then that straw first off, it makes it pretty because it makes it all gold. And you have a little golden carpet. I don't know how big you want it or where it is or whatever, or the sun or whatever, but that's a way to do a step to see what will grow underneath there and on top of it. I don't know what you're thinking about plant-wise, or if you're trying to do garden for food or pollination or
Basically, we
whatever.
just want healthy soil again, and then we'll figure it out.
Well, you will be shocked at how once you do some actual sheet mulching, how much you want the worms. What you want to do is to bring the worms up, and the worms will be coming if they have this sheet mulch set up. Then I've seen it even for cardboard, but certainly for newspaper. So,
Thank you for your suggestion.
yeah.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had any other specific permacultures that you've found success with, especially maybe lesser known ones,
Or even known ones.
or even known ones actually.
Sure. The others that I have noticed is, and we've got one here, so Monarda fistulosa, bee balm. Bee balm does not actually grow well with other things typically. It doesn't like friends around it. However, butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, which is the orange milkweed, grows in the same condition as long as you give them enough space as bee balm. So, again, dry, rocky soil, some moisture though. So not always dry, just some dryness, some moisture. And the butterfly weed, which is tuberosa, does the same thing. It enjoys the same conditions, but you have got to give them at least 6 feet of space.
6 feet, okay.
Yeah, so they do very well in proximity. They're just not close friends and neighbors. And then, obviously, if you're looking for shrubs and subshrubs, things such as the willows, which grow alongside winterberry, which grow alongside alders, which grow alongside sometimes the white pines, and then the sedges are usually at the forefront of those, and below the sedges are the mosses. So all of those are just amazing communities of plants that you'll see often growing together. And in Maine, we've got 26 different species of native willow, with the black willow, South Cedar being the most prevalent. So if you ever stop by and see the willow, look around. Meadow Street grows well within that community as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I add to that a little bit?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I'm from further south, but from southern New England, so this may not have direct applicability to Maine, but I'll share it anyway. So, as Ivonne is explaining, just by looking around and observing, you get to see what plants that they grow in association with each other. So I have observed that pokeweed and black raspberry frequently grow together. And so if I see one and I don't see the other, I'm confident that I can plant the other one, and it's going to do well because they like the same. They're attached, and they grow together. And in terms of polyculture, that you're not really going to see occurring in nature, but one that I understand does well is black walnut, which has this reputation as being allelopathic and it kills all the stuff around it. Well, it's actually not true. There's many things that thrive under black walnut trees, like just about anything in the Prunus genus grows under black walnut. Black raspberry also grows under black walnut, and pawpaws grow under black walnut. And pawpaws do really well in the shade, so I think that's a wonderful potential combination of having the pawpaws and black walnuts. And they'd be right roughly around the same time too, so it's a place you want to visit to look for the pawpaw fruit and the black walnuts.
Thank you. So that's actually due to the juglans, which is, it's basically, and cedars do something similar with a allelopathic, and basically they secrete something into the soil, and their oils, they're sort of, those volatile oils that we all love for different reasons, those oils actually keep certain plants from taking root near the trees. And in that way, the trees ensure that nothing else takes their moisture and their soil nutrients away from them. Another thing, Russ, that I noticed grows very well for black walnuts and cedars happens to be wintergreen, which is also the state wintergreen, which is the state herb of Maine, and it's a perennial, and it's edible, medicinal, and it's beneficial to many overwintering birds and early season pollinators as well.
So if I happen to have a small black walnut sapling or seedling that I'm going to be planting, should I go ahead and plant any of these other things around it while it's tiny, or wait until it gets bigger?
It's because it's a defense mechanism to keep things from taking nutrients and moisture from it. You may find that it will actually outcompete those other things, and those other things may die off, because now the tree will be in sort of uber defensive. It wants to grow tall. It can't do that with other things around it. So I personally would recommend that you wait a few years, and it will take quite a long time for the tree. I think it takes up to 20 years perhaps for a walnut tree to actually wait for a few years, make sure that it's well established before you do anything. And if you're going to introduce something, don't introduce something that is going to be as furtive in getting nutrients, maybe like a winter green around it, where it's a ground cover and it's not necessarily competing with the lawn.
Yes, years ago I planted comfrey underneath a plum tree or a pear tree, and it pretty much killed the pear tree.
Really?
So
Except
I
apple
had
trees.
lots of comfrey and I had the pear tree back.
Oh, okay.
And comfrey has a taproot that can go down to about 16 feet, which is why it's actually good for compost acceleration, because it's able to capture nutrients that nothing else can capture. And then you can shred those leaves and put them into the compost, and it'll accelerate the compost process.
One that you plant once.
So if we notice, like on my land, or on the land that I stored, I notice, like evening primrose coming up in some places and milkweed, but do you recommend that like when we see these communities kind of coming together, like that it's better to take like a hands-off approach, like when you saw that trio coming up, like is that like a good time to just like let it do its thing, or are there things that we can do to like help?
So it depends what it is you'd like to do. Perhaps you'd like to use that space with other plants. I take a very hands-off approach personally, and I do that for a number of reasons. And again, we're all different, and we all have different needs in our gardens, in our garden style. And the reason I do that is because I also want to capture those seeds, because I also sell seed in the fall. And so in order to get those seeds, I need to have as many of those plants as possible, because I don't want to take away from every plant. I want to take away from those specific plants. But if I know that I have a robust community, then I just leave it alone so that I can actually propagate from it or take seed from it. So it depends. You know, if you have need for that space, and we all have different amounts of space too. You know, maybe you only have so much area for it, and you use the area however you need to. And if you decide to take a hands-off approach, good for you too. For me, it's as long as what you see in your garden pleases you and makes your heart sing and brings you what you need from it, whether it's food, medicine, clothing, the permaculture lifestyle, whatever it is, if that garden provides it, then you use that garden as you need to. And go by your intuition too. I think sometimes we forget that we all have intuition, and we all feel something about how something should grow in our spaces. And then we listen to a podcast and it says, no, get rid of this. Or we listen to the neighbor, oh, get rid of that. Or we listen to something, or we read something in an article somewhere. And all along, your intuition may have been right on for exactly how you want to use your space. And so I encourage you to listen to that too. I hope that helps. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about American Senna, if you know anything about it, what it is, and just started it, I'm curious to learn more about it.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorites. It's
Could you
actually-
repeat that question, please?
She would like to know if I know anything about American Senna, or Senna edicarpa, or Cassia. It's all used to be called Cassia edicarpa, now it's Senna edicarpa. It is a stunning plant, and it is native to sort of Maryland, that kind of, sort of the upper south of the U.S. I do have growing in my garden. It does not grow well with anything else around it. So if you ever grow it, it does not like to play well with others. It grows beautifully. And last year it grew to about 7 feet tall and about 6 feet wide. And it is, I wish I might have a photo of it somewhere.
How do you spell it?
Senna, S-E-N-N-A.
Okay.
And that is the name of the plant.
Okay.
And the botanical name is Senna edicarpa. So it's S-E-N-N-A, and edicarpa is H-E-B-E-C-A-R-P-A. the sun, when it's in full bloom, or before it's in full bloom, at this time of year, the heat of the day hits it, it smells of figs. It smells like a fig tree. It's absolutely stunning. Yes. You had a question?
It looks like an organization.
Oh, no. This is my speech.
It's just randomly. That was a quiz.
That is not it.
Okay,
I'm going to try and find a photo of the center. Did you find one?
But does it grow, would it be wild around here?
No, it is not native to Maine. It is native to sort of Maryland, Pennsylvania, that part of the U.S.
Not native to Maine yet.
Yeah, and it moves up, right?
And I actually do sell Senna Agroforestry, and it is quite stunning. It actually stops people in their tracks at the farmers markets. But it's a beautiful plant. It does have some toxicity, but I know Russ perhaps knows a little more about any edible.
As far as I know, it's not.
No, it's rather toxic. And it's probably the only one that has any sort of toxicity, although milkweed technically does too. But Senna Agroforestry is just stunning. And I'm going to try, actually, if you go onto my website, which is bassrougefarm.com, and you go to native plants, I actually have a photo of Senna Agroforestry in full flower. And it's in the pea family. So it has these beautiful yellow flowers with these deep chocolate, dark spots inside of chocolate anthers as well. So it's actually very, very interesting, very stunning. So I'm sorry, did you have other questions about Senna or no?
I was just curious about kind of the history of Senna and what people like yourself and other jobs, I don't know, what people are doing to bring it back to those kind of behavior. And what you can do to help promote its growth and where it prefers to grow, or what ecosystems, what soil conditions.
So it prefers to grow in the same conditions as Monarda castellosa, the bee balm. So that dry, disturbed, not a lot of nutritional value, but nowhere near other plants. It really does not like to compete with anything else. And the way that I've observed it does that is actually it will not grow. It will just stop growing. It almost goes into a little bit of a tantrum and it decides it's not going to grow. And once you take everything else away from it, it starts growing again. So it's a very fascinating plant. In the past, it has been used as a laxative. So senna used to be used, which is an old laxative. Yeah. Now I don't know if it's senna agroforestry that was used for that purpose or not, or if it was a different species of senna. Yes.
I'm just curious about what's that in your other plants, like, in like a sand pit, or like, I guess it could be in the meadow, like below the grasses, or like how would it not be, or like in a garden, like soil around?
For the senna, is that okay? So the area where it grows in my garden happens to be an area where, after they built the house, they took all of that sort of foundational material and just dropped it. Or, when they put in a leach field and they took that excess and just dropped it, that sort of sandy, rocky, porous structure, that's what it prefers. And so that's why I have those conditions, because it happens to be just alongside the house and not too far from where the leach field is. So at some point, someone just decided to drop a bunch of stuff there and nothing else grew. And when I came along, I started to plant things that I thought would do well there. So if that helps you along. Now, if you don't have those conditions, you can also amend your soil areas. So if you wanted to plant something that needs good drainage and needs the sandy soil and the rocky soil, start gathering bits of pebbles and stones or rocks or gravel. Start gathering some sand and start mixing that into your soil, because that will actually improve the conditions for those particular plants without damaging the rest of the soil structure. But if there's something you really want to have there, and you don't necessarily have those conditions, create those conditions for that plant.
Would it be like a roadside, I mean,
The
off a
roadside,
roadside,
exactly,
stuff
that
is
is-
where things like that will,
Exactly, which is why some of
Without
those
salt.
thrive, yeah. So one of the plants that thrives beautifully, it's a shrub, is serviceberry, thrives in those conditions. You see those growing and flowering along the sides of the roads. Elderberry does well in those conditions, even though elderberry also likes moisture. It's usually near a culvert, but it likes those conditions as well.
I had a question to ask you, what do you read?
What do I read?
Where do you read? Where do
Oh,
you
my
get a
word.
lot? Like, where do you get a lot of your, what do you like?
The list is shorter as to what I don't read. I read everything. I read notices on bulletin boards. I read, backs of packages. I read anything that has printed word on it. And because to me, it's amazing what you might miss because you didn't take a moment to read something. And what happens, it's almost like what happens when you're on the internet and you start researching something, and then all of a sudden you're 20 things away from your original idea or thought. The same thing happens to me with the written word. Because that triggers some other thought that I had, which made me think of a book that I bought, and I go and find a book, or I go to the library, or go and find a magazine, or talk to the person who bought the book, I borrowed the book. It becomes this multi-layered research quest. But what I find is that it exercises the mind, and it makes you a better researcher, and it makes you a better hound of information, and it makes you tenacious at trying to find real information on something, because there's a lot of misinformation about a lot of stuff out there. And instead of following all of those little paths, I find that I learn quite a lot. But I do, if you're looking for specific things that I've read, and so many books. Believe it or not, the USDA has a plethora of information, and it's scientifically backed, and we won't pay for it. And it's free. And I received a book, it was all about propagation of woodland species, and it's about a 1,500-page book that I received for free from the USDA. So go onto those websites, and some of us are perhaps of an age where we remember, you send something to the box in Colorado, they'll send you all sorts of free information. That still exists, believe it or not. And it's still out there in some manner or form. So there's a lot of information out there. And I talk to a lot of people. I love to have conversations, like the conversation I had with Russ. I keep pointing to Russ. But it was a delightful conversation because I've actually been interested in learning more about more edible native plants. And lo and behold, this person appears at my table earlier this morning while I was setting up. And how wonderful. And to be able to have that conversation with someone who's doing it, who's actually got their fingers in the soil and has that tactile experience with the plants and that observational anecdotal data as well. So read everything, no matter what it is, even if you're at the doctor's office. Yes.
That reminds me of a resource that I can't very well identify, but I can describe. I think everybody who's working in state nature knows how to use a description of something like 150 different microenvironments in the state and all of the plants that grow in them.
You talk about the natural communities of Maine.
Yeah, from 2018, that's available online in PDF format. So you can identify, your particular woodland or your particular grassland or whatever it is. And I have a question about alders. You mentioned alders before. I have a number of acres of speckled alder fields that you know were taken by speckled alder, which is kind of like the first thing that happens when you stop mowing. And I thought that I'd like to figure out what would happily go there, that I could maybe encourage to go in with the alders so they're a little less, lonely, or they take a little longer. Yeah, they take longer. They're going to develop over time. But conservation and biodiversity. So the question is, you know, are there plants that should be introduced with this speckled almond? And
Which
that's
means
very-
they have wet areas.
Yes.
Yeah, so right there, sedges, most of our native sedges, and in Maine, I believe, and there are some wonderful books, The Sedges of Maine, and The Rushes of Maine, I have all those books as well. But sedges are perhaps your first and easiest go-to, for what to put in the ground, in an area where all those, grow, because they like moisture, most of them
Yeah.
except for raised sedge, which is more of an woodland sedge, and rose sedge, which likes drier conditions as well, Caris rosea and Caris gay. But the hummocks of tussock sedge, which is Caris stricta, that would do very well for those conditions. Some of the rushes would do well in those conditions, even some of the like switchgrass might do well in those conditions, because it does like a bit of moisture. But I would start, and for, I do sell native plants, but I also have a plant list, and I try to be as descriptive as possible on that list to let you know what soil conditions it needs and what sun conditions a plant needs. So if you have an opportunity, go and look at that, because it might help you, especially if you go somewhere else to purchase a plant. You might be able to say, oh, wait a minute, that plant, may do better for me because I have those kind of conditions. So if you go into the plant list that I have on my website, I actually have several different sedges, and that's the reason I'm referencing you to that is it will give you a really good jumping off place to then discover what other sedges might be native to your area and which you might do well based on whatever other conditions you might have pre-existing. But yeah, I would start with sedge. Because if you notice that photo that I showed up today, just beyond that are the alders. And all of that is just nothing but different types of sedge.
Could I add a suggestion to that? So, there is a plant I've seen called water avens or purple avens, grow underneath the alders and likes the same habitat conditions. And it's also called chocolate root because it knows you can make whatever that tastes like chocolate from the root. I've never done it.
A-V-E-S?
A-V-E-N-S. So it's I'm trying to remember the acronym. Here it comes.
Also, just another resource, you go to NRCS, USDA, they have a book, I think it's like 61 pages long, of pollinator and friendly plant species in the Northeast.
And it's the Xerces Society, if any of you are ever interested in delving into what are good pollinator plants and what are good for different regions, the Xerces Society, XERCES.org, is also an incredible resource. But
Could you-
does that answer your question? I don't know.
What was that last one, that last?
Xerces, SERCES.org.
You going outside?
Yes. So we're going to do, really quick, because I know it's almost time, like, we're really put hands on. If you wanted to actually put, permaculture seed in pots and leave with you, or if you just